Hey everyone, we've got a new pitch website, pitchpodcast.fm. Comment on your favorite episodes, get all the latest news, and discuss the podcast with us. Pitchpodcast.fm. If you become a subscriber, you'll be able to access real pitches and ad-free episodes, watch member-only live streams starring us, your hosts, and ask questions we'll answer in future pitch episodes. Join us at pitchpodcast.fm and help us bring you more great content.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Pitch. I'm Leah St. Marie.
Hey, and I am Angel.
And today we have a special guest, somebody that I met at the Austin Film Festival. Kay Tuxford is a fearless bisexual in a 10-year plus throuple who writes angry, smart women distrustful of society for good reason. I love that. But of course, need connection with fellow human beings to make this world worthwhile. Kay is the writer of The Miseducation of Bindu EP'd by the Duplass brothers, currently on Peacock TV and Tubi. She's a two-time Nichols semifinalist, congratulations, a Script Pipeline TV writer, a Women in Film X-Blacklist Episodic Lab semifinalist, and a TV pilot since she once earned her a handshake from Ari Emanuel in an elevator. Very, very cool. Kate graduated from Northern Arizona University with a BS in biology before transitioning from STEM nerd to film nerd. She teaches screenwriting at Chapman University and is loved by her kids, wife, husband, and probably just tolerated by her cats. But also, you are an Austin Film Festival reader, and you have been for a decade.
I was a reader for Austin just this year, but I've been a contest reader for several decades for different for a decade. So just I don't want to lie about how long I've been reading for Austin.
Thank you for the clarification. Now, did I say your Duplass brothers thing correctly?
Yeah, that sounds great. They actually pronounce it Duplass. Like when you hear them talk, I always call them Duplass, or there's two of them, so sometimes I say the Dupli, but that's actually how they pronounce their name. Yeah,
but I meant the Miseducation of Bindu.
Oh, Bindu. Yes.
Okay,
You did great. Bindu. Yeah, it's an Indian girl in American public school, so her name is Bindu.
Very, very cool. Well, welcome, Kay.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you for having me today.
So, just some background on Kay and I. We met at the Austin Film Festival in the Dresden, where I was eating a delicious chocolate cake.
That's right.
And I think you had a drink in your hand, and we sat on the couch together.
Yes. I was, we were at I think it was the Driscoll. You went Germany on me. You went Dresden.
Sorry, it was the Driscoll. Thank you.
It was the Driscoll. No, it's okay. It was my first time at Austin, and I was drinking this magnificent orange drink that is like a creamsicle martini, like in a coupe glass, but it kept spilling as well, which the coupe glass is so elegant looking, but it's not a very walkable, movable glass, and I feel like it's time for technology to get on that. Yes, but we sat down, we talked about pitching, we talked about writing, we talked about chocolate cake, obviously, because you had opinions on that as well.
So good. It was so good. If you ever go to the Driscoll Hotel, get their signature chocolate cake. I could never finish a whole piece by myself, so my friend Missy and I tried, but the two of us together never finished. And now this has become the Cake Podcast. Welcome.
Is anyone mad at that?
No, they shouldn't be. I know our friend Carrie, who is on the podcast, would love it because she bakes all those cookies.
Oh yeah, she was out in force during the writer strike and the actor strike, baking cookies for everybody.
What were her cookies? The one with the little writer signs?
Yeah.
Oh, I love those.
Yeah.
You could write your own little slogan on them. That's great.
So in your bio, you made a huge switch at some point in your adult life, going from biology
yes,
to writing, screenwriting specifically. Can you talk about that transition and what led you to, make the change?
Yes. My only fear is if I say this, I'm going to turn a lot of other people into screenwriters. So
you're setting them for a horrible fate if you do that.
Yeah, I'm so sorry if this emboldens you. No, so I'm I come from a family where we value a lot of math and sciences. I did well and excelled in them in school. My sister is actually a doctor. We had the same degree when we graduated undergrad. So my family was like, oh, we got another one in the family. Good. We did good. Middle class family in Arizona, they're like, two doctors or a doctor and a chemist or something. Yeah, we're good. But I realized once I finished it, the thing that I was actually really good at was writing papers and helping my fellow scientists write papers. They jokingly said, oh my God, this is so nerdy. I had the spongiest corpus callosum of the class, like the in between the right brain and the left brain. They're like, she just goes in between them. So I found myself doing a lot of writing. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm doing this because I know I'm good at it, and I know that, my family feels like I'll be safe and taken care of, but am I happy? It was one of those questions. And so I said, there was nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't necessarily like my passion. And so I did apply to film school on a lark when I got my senior year of undergrad. I said, well, I'll apply, and if they don't accept me, I'll go do the normal thing. And they accepted me. So suddenly I had to really like think if I wanted to go or not. And they accepted me early too. So like I knew in like March of my senior year in college, like a film school in LA wanted me. So I took the leap, and I've never regretted it, and I've loved every minute of it. So there you go. And to help pay the bills while I was while I was going to film school, I worked at a lab. And so, both of them kind of came together. I was like writing screenplays, and then I was like counting coliforms on a petri dish, and then back to writing screenplays for a little while. So they merged in a brief period of my life.
Very cool.
I
Yeah.
have one of my best friends from college. She was a sculptor, and she applied to get her master's in art. But at the same time, she applied to get her master's in neuroscience because that was also her field.
Mhm.
And it was the quarter flip situation where which you don't know which
Yeah.
way your life is going to end up. And the art school didn't accept her. So she got her PhD eventually, and she's a neuroscientist for the CDC.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I felt like I was at a coin flip. And I think either way I'd be a pretty happy person, but I definitely love nerding out on film and screenplays. So I'm very happy.
Well, we're happy to have you here. And speaking of screenplays, we have a bunch of questions for you about being an Austin Film Festival reader.
Yes.
How many scripts did you read this year?
So that's a good question. There's like two categories of types of scripts that you read for Austin. Well, there's actually more categories than that, but what you have to do is read a certain amount of scripts, cover to cover, the full script, and you have to do about 50 of those, bare minimum, and then also you have to read about the same amount, 50, for scripts that have already been evaluated, and you have to read them. Generally, it's at least like the first 30 pages to make sure the evaluation is right. Although sometimes, and this happened to me, is that you read the first 30 and you read the evaluation and you go, well, I don't know if that's the same story I'm reading. So you have to read it all the way through. And then you potentially are rewriting the first person's notes if you disagree with them. So it could be up to 100 scripts. For me, it was probably somewhere in the 60, 70 range of like cover to cover. But I started only in August. I was a late bloomer for August. So some people had the whole summer to be reading,
Wow.
and they read more than me.
How did you find your way into that position?
I had a friend who read for them, and I realized that so one of the things, if you volunteer and do reading, you can get a pass to go to Austin. And I knew I was already going, and I knew I had some spare time. So I decided to hit him up and say, hey, can I throw my resume in, because I have read for other contests, and I'm relatively qualified. So he basically gave me the email and said, good luck, kid. Shout out to Colin Lieberg on that one. And right away, what they do is they read your resume, make sure that like you're kind of in the appropriate, you're applying for the appropriate volunteer position, and then you have a basically a reading test you have to do, which is you read a script in any category you want to be a reader for, and you have to supply notes. And it's a script they already kind of know. They came from the past, so they already kind of know how it landed in general. So they want to see if you're kind of on the mark.
So there are different readers for different genres, and you get to pick.
You get to pick. So I mean, if you wanted to read everything, you could. You would just have to read a test script for each genre. By the time it was August when I applied, some of the categories were already pretty much done, so they didn't need more readers. Short films goes pretty quickly for that reason, as well as I think podcast. But I did a lot of stage plays, features, as well as like 1 hour TV. Those were kind of the categories I ended up doing a lot of reading for. And features are broken up between comedy and drama. So even those categories you have to test for.
I love how thorough they are.
They really are. Yeah. And then as we were talking about before, you write your notes, the notes that everybody gets after the contest is done. And those are reviewed by at least one more reader before they're sent to you and to see if they're appropriate or not, which is that second category I was talking about 50 more scripts. You have to kind of oversee someone else's notes.
Do you have any insight or into the judging process after you as a reader have given your notes?
Yeah, so once you give your notes, you give it a rating. What it is like if you're a part of the first round read, you give it a rating, and one of the ratings is, not ready for second round, close to being ready for second round, a second rounder, potentially a semifinalist or potentially a finalist, aka winner. And so you rate those things as you go through, and then when you go to the second round, and you're judging for that, there's a different qualitative process where you're using a number system, and then your number system will match up what round you feel that they qualify for. So when they're judging, they look at like the first round, like, oh, did this person say second round? Did the second reader say this is a second round or higher? Did they agree? Did they even recommend higher? So it keeps going up like that. So you kind of basically the judging kind of goes by like, wow, every person who read this said it was a semifinalist script. Let's consider it for that. And it goes into that pool.
Are the categories for second round, semifinalists, finalists, are they capped? Like, can only 500 people be a second rounder and 100 people be a semifinalist, or how does that work?
There's no cap that I'm aware of. So if there is, that would be, I don't see why there would be. I've never been a part of a contest where there was a cap. Sometimes it feels like it, but I think when we did training and my own experience for other contests is there's usually a general percentage that the scripts land around. So I think for Austin, the scripts land around 20%, make it 20% or less, make it to the second round. And so when you start reading scripts, you start going, okay, I have 10 scripts in my queue. I'm noticing like as I've gone through, this one's not ready, this one's not ready, this one, oh, it's getting close. And then you might notice like out of the 10, 1 or 2 is getting recommended for second round. And so it's not that, if you read 3 second round scripts in a row and they're all good and all deserve to be second round, there's no limitation for that. Nobody's like, oh no, you can only pick 2. But I will notice statistically it ends up being that on its own. But yeah, I don't think that anybody gets cut off, which is great. Because if you're like a late submitter, you don't want to miss out. Film festivals are like that, where they're like, oh, this is great, but we only have we've scheduled most of it. We only have like a couple slots left and we're still taking entries. What
are some of the other contests that you've read for? Because you said you've been doing this for a while, yeah?
Yeah, so I read for Blue Cat, and I read for a couple of contests that don't exist anymore. There was a company called the Writer Store, and they ran their own contest mid 2000s, no, not 2000, 2010s, from like 2010 to 2015. And their contest was a little bit different, where you would get a log line from A-list screenwriter. You would submit the first 15 pages, and then they would pick 10 people that had really great first 15s, and they would coach them into finishing the full screenplay. So we had some success with that one, where some people went on to option and sell their scripts from that process as well. So that was kind of like a different sort of contest. And then, and they also had some reading contests from there. I worked for the writer's store until they closed in the mid, I think it was like 2016. So I did a lot of contest reading through them. There was another place based out of Texas called Script Savvy I read for when I first got out of film school. And then I'm trying to think of the other contest. Yeah, I was gonna say, and then I think Blue Cat, and I retired for a little bit. Because reader burnout is a real thing, and you want to
Yeah.
make sure every time you're reading a script, you're giving it its due diligence, because somebody did sit there and put in all that time and hours, even if it's not ready. There was a lot of love poured in.
So I want to ask you, what are some things in scripts that you have read through all of your years of being a contest reader that are very tropey, or that you would love to not see ever again in a script? Because I know a lot of our listeners are going to be very curious about editing after they listen to your podcast episode.
Absolutely. There are some standard scene tropes that I think we can do away with. One of the ones I've hated since film school is when you open on a bunch of photographs that shows everybody and your characters and your relationships.
Yep.
You find that in a lot of short films, because they only have like one scene that they've got to explore. And so that's their quick, like, oh, this person's related to who. But it's best to avoid it unless you're telling it like a really intricate story with the photographs or something like that. Like Searching, the movie where you're just looking at a computer screen is, that's actually has a very moving scene explaining relationships that way. So it's not a no, but I would say cut 2 photographs. I'm like, ooh, I sigh, and I'm like, that's a basic choice. Obviously, a person waking up in the morning it's a natural instinct to people, like, oh, how do they start their day? But it's good to not have, because we don't get as much information about that specific character versus just a human being waking up in the morning. So you can put something more specific to your character in there. I think the biggest problem I run into is there's a huge this is something I have a screenwriting class I teach at Chapman as well, and we're working on our Act Ones in the fall this semester. And the thing is people sometimes don't want to hurt their characters, and so I find a lot of really soft Act Ones where the person who's experiencing the inconvenience or the conflict is like the blows keep getting softened for them instead of having some devastating things happen. And so for me, I think it's oftentimes I'm like, stop being nice. You'll be nice. They'll be victorious in the end.
Yes.
But go hard if you need to go hard, because you've got this, all this tension and stuff that's got to carry us 90 pages. So it's kind of like coiling up that spring in a pinball game, and you really want to pull it back as far as you can. So I think that's probably the number one problem I run into, is people don't really build up enough energy in the beginning.
George R.R. Martin talks about being as cruel to your main characters as possible.
Yes.
And with Game of Thrones, if you haven't, no spoilers, but with Game of Thrones, you see that throughout. Every single time we fall in love with someone, we have hope for someone, it's just devastation, which is the best.
It's good for us, because we can witness it and we can be devastated for them, but we can then turn off the TV and have a great time. And so it's kind of nice to like compartmentalize that. But I think it makes your audience feel more victorious when they went through hell and back at the end to get where they're going to get. And I think if it's too easy, or as I say, like too soft, which is like the stakes aren't high enough, I'm not like super invested yet, then it's too easy to like tune out or be like, oh, if they don't get the girl, it seems fine. They'll be fine. No big deal. or if like, oh, they needed to get a little bit of money, but they didn't quite get the money, but it seems like they'll be fine. They'll just, you're not too invested.
So, knowing all of these different tropes that you see in scripts, what's something that you wish a writer would ask themselves for each scene?
That's an excellent question. I think a lot of scenes occur that could tell me more information than I think is sometimes in a first draft. So oftentimes, if I'm writing my own script or I'm helping someone write a script, the question is, how much info can we put in there? How much character revealing stuff, how much conflict can we put in this scene? So it's like, man, this scene is only like 2 or 3 minutes of the script, but it's getting a lot done. And so a lot of times it's basically telling them like, hey, each scene has to be kind of special and interesting. And it's not just like, oh, again, a person brushing their teeth in the morning. That's valuable. I say with my friends sometimes, that's valuable real estate on a screenplay. 90 pages seems like a lot when you're first writing a first draft. But when you're writing and trying to do another draft and another draft and another draft, you suddenly realize how little space that is to get in everything you want to tell. And so I think the biggest thing I tell people in the scenes is, what's the point of the scene? And also, what do you want the audience to feel about the scene? So sometimes we think about like, oh, I just want to establish like Bill and Joe are friends. Okay, well, we don't really need to see a full scene of that. We can see like Joe shows up and takes him to work. In 2 seconds, you kind of get the nature of their relationship. But it'd be more interesting to show Bill asks Joe for money and then find out that Joe hasn't paid him from last time, and we get a lot more about their friendship.
That's exactly right. I think the best note or the best way to think about edits when you're considering scene by scene is, where's the tension? And it could be physical or it could be emotional, but it has to be there. Otherwise, what is the point?
What's the point? Exactly. We could just cut to the next scene with tension. And I think there's something in new writers as well. They feel like they have to be honest to like the time of day where we watch the character get up, we watch the character drive, we watch them get to work. And they want to show every single thing that their character does. But when we watch stuff, there are huge gaps where we just cut to the next dramatic thing. It's chronologically follows an emotional through line, but we don't need to see somebody like go to the bathroom and take a nap and stuff. You could cut from their first day at work to their 6 months at work with no distance, and it could tell us something.
How long have you been teaching screenwriting?
I started during the pandemic, so 2021.
Okay.
And I teach short film and feature, but features probably, I mean, I love short film. It's really great, but features kind of like my favorite thing to teach because it's a 2-semester course at Chapman. So we spend an entire year writing one script, and we do it. I'm so happy. I'm like, we get to do it right because we start with idea to treatment to outline to step outline where we've got the scenes and the cards. And so, and then rewriting. So it's like, it feels like by the end of the 2 semesters, I'm like, listen, you've got the whole process down. You just need to do it again and again and again.
So for our listeners, you can't see this, but she's got note cards behind her, whereas I'm a whiteboard guy, and we had a little discussion before we started. Do you insist that your students lean in one direction or another when they're conceiving or outlining? Note cards, whiteboards, or what is your suggestion to them?
Yeah, so a lot of my students, because they're younger folks that are 19, 20, some of them do like the tactile process of like a whiteboard or a note card, but I actually just have a document where they have to, like, I'll have scenes 1 through 10, and they have to basically list like, interior coffee shop day, what happens in the scene, who's in it, what's the conflict of the scene, is it a positive or a negative to your character? So they have to fill it out for each scene, per each act, turn it into me, and then I approve that part of the outline, and they can keep going. So some of them go home and do the whiteboard stuff. I think it's a great process, but I don't make them, just because some of them are just like so like they just work off of a tablet or a computer, and they don't ever make like physical notes, which I don't know how, because that's my favorite way to procrastinate. And it's so tactile, and I'll rewrite it and I'll be like, oh, I don't like how I phrase this. Let me rephrase it. It's such a great like week to stall and just really bask in your story and think in that headspace. I do recommend it, but several of my students probably don't do it. They probably are like, yeah, whatever. She's on a bender with note cards.
One of my favorite exercises, and the reason I like a whiteboard so much, is because you can't see it in mine in the background, but I'll literally do a timeline, which is how we consume stories, right? It's like
Mhm.
from one point in time until another point in time. And for me, early on, note cards were helpful, but visualizing, like abstracting a story in a timeline, which is not how we write, pages, and not how we write note cards and stack them, was a real game changer for me for getting the story out of my head and into something physical, and then seeing it across like a literal line, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the biggest argument I have for using a whiteboard when I've like tried to work with people who were like kind of newer to writing. I'm like, we got to get a whiteboard. They're like, why would we do that? I'm like, well, it helps to get out of your head and have some tactile things that some people say are like wasting time, but I think are really helpful when you're conceiving this like really ethereal thing known as story, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it puts you in this kind of meditative state, especially when it's physical like that, where you can write down a story point, you can look at it, you can erase it in 2 seconds, and you can move it elsewhere and go, well, what happens if that goes here? And it's something when you're writing a screenplay and it's kind of like in the pages, it's much harder to visualize. But when you look at these, I call them it's micro to macro. If you're looking at the macro, it's easier to see these bigger pieces and move them around and ask those questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was writing a double narrative that took place in two different timelines. And to help keep everything organized, each timeline had a different color note card. And it was so helpful just to visually see it on my wall. Lots of tape went into that project.
We're keeping office supply stores open in
Single-handedly.
2023. Yeah.
Yeah.
My family, when we like pass an office supply store, they're like, is she gonna make it past that door? And then I just run in anyway.
You always need the supplies.
Always, always.
So, do you, in your experience, think that some people have what it takes to be writers, even though most of the tools can be taught? Or like some people just like innately like gifted with cracking this thing known as screenwriting?
I'm not of the mindset that some people just have talent and that floats them through, partly because screenwriting is such a foreign way of storytelling for us. We don't grow up learning how to write screenplays. Maybe if you told me like someone, wrote a short story or maybe a novel and it just came out of them, I would believe you. But I think screenwriting takes so much studying to organize and cut and visualize and realize what to leave out and what to keep in. And although we watch them as viewers since we're young folk, we don't really look behind the curtain until you start studying it and seeing how the cogs are turning. So I think people can have like an innate story ability where they can sit there going, ooh, that's interesting. Ooh, that's where conflict is. Ooh, that's where I want to know what the answer is. But I don't think anybody starts with this um, innate ability for screenwriting. And I think that's where like learning and reading jumps in there and teaches you that. And I give a lot more credit to the putting in the time than the talent. Not saying talent doesn't matter, but you don't need that much to jump in there, but you do need to put a lot of dedication in the craft to excel. And I think I meet a lot of people who are good writers, interesting writers. I was part of a creative writing program before I went to film school, and there are some people I met in that program that I'm like, they're better writers than me. But they weren't necessarily as dedicated or didn't want to go as far with it. They had other things that were important to them, and they're not here. And that's fine. Not every person needs to become a screenwriter, but I think putting in that time and finding that time worthwhile is going to pay off more for you.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think something that has been bred into me through all of the different courses that I've taken, especially my master's courses, when we're doing table dissection of work, is you're a better writer if you're a better reader. So the more that you read, the better you write. And speaking of people who are screenwriters who really focus on their craft and want to enhance and make themselves better and improve, what's something as an Austin Film Festival reader that you read in scripts where you know this is next level? Like, what is that?
Yeah. So that's excellent. So I think the thing I'm a big fan of is you can tell somebody's skilled when there's less overall because they've had time to edit and polish. My usual I hate to say this because this isn't always true, but if I open up a new script and I say, oh, 121, 120 pages, they just found the bare minimum of acceptable screenplay, shrunk it down to that and stuck it in there. That's my first thought usually. And my second thought is like when you read your first sentence or two, I'm like, is this a sentence that's inviting me as the audience member, or is it more like a chore? Like a man sits by a table. Okay, well, I mean, this is like your first sentence of your novel. Like, are you going to tell me about the man, or, can I have some details? Can I have something that kind of brings me in? And I think it's those polishes that make you realize, like, oh, I can say something with the same space that's more informative, or I can shrink it down because I realize now that I know my story better, it's really only 110 pages I need. And I think oftentimes it's realizing that, as things get polished, they get a little bit shorter usually. And I don't see a lot of what I call like extra words, extra space. One of the things people always talk about is white space on the page, where the stuff on the page is helping you kind of like read down and just follow the key parts of the story. But the other thing about white spaces on the page is just sometimes I'm reading stuff that's being included in the script and I don't need it. Like a new writer might say like interior outside coffee shop day. Oh, no, I'm sorry, exterior outside coffee shop day. And I'm like, oh, that could just be exterior coffee shop day because exterior means outside. So there's some redundancies you meet when you meet a new writer or something that needs a little bit more revision that makes me sit there going, okay, we're not quite there yet. I also just love it when I find a script that's under 100 pages. I, as a writer, am a big believer of the under 100 page script, which isn't perfect for every genre. So if anyone else out there has an over 100 page script, it's okay. But I think it's really great because it's a good time for a reader. Many times when I write like a 90 page or 100 page script and I'm giving it to somebody, they're able to tell me, oh, I sat down and could do it in one reading. And, I was just in it. And then, an hour passed and I was done. So I like kind of designing an experience for a reader like that, where I want them to just be in that world for a little bit of time and kind of be sucked in and not realize like the pages are flying by.
How much of what you're sharing with your students speaks to, hey, you're writing for a reader first and foremost, period?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about there's two different types of screenplays that are out there. A reader draft or a spec draft is the one we're writing for people. I call it reader or audience, because sometimes I'll sit there going, okay, let's all pretend we're watching the movie. And we're in the audience and they're reading what's happening and what we're seeing on the screen. And how do we feel about it? We're the audience. And so sometimes I say audience instead of reader, but a reader is an audience member and they're trying to sit there and like see the movie for what it is. So that's really always like the first line of defense. And I think when we read other people's scripts and stuff, even if we're want to be very high-minded and think about the craft and everything we know, we engage with the script first as a reader, audience member, and go like, oh, is this fun? I'm enjoying it. Do I care what happens to the characters? So I think that's always the first place you want to go. And what's great about like a workshop, if you're writing pages and getting feedback, is you can turn to everybody and go, I wanted this scene us to really feel for that character. How'd you guys feel about this character? And if they sit there and go, oh, I was so in it. I was so invested. I need to know what happens next. You're like, yes, that scene's working. Or if people go, oh, I was way more interested in something else, you kind of know you're off course already. If you know what you wanted that scene to be about for, again, a reader. It's also what's interesting is that writing for a reader or an audience member, I think this is something people struggle with, is it's a manipulative process. You're deciding what information to give them and what information to hold back to amplify the storytelling. And so sometimes people feel like they're doing their reader dirty, but we as audience members like being manipulated that way. So I'm all in for it.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we are recording this at the tail end of November. The contest starts accepting entries next spring. We
Yes.
have time, which is such a blessing. So anybody who's listening to this will probably release this episode in January. Any screenwriter who's thinking about submitting their script to the Austin Film Festival 2024, what are 3 tips you recommend now that they're blessed with this time? What should they be doing?
Okay, so I think first and foremost, you have time right now to read and exchange scripts with your peers and get feedback. Coverfly X, for example, does like a token-based system where you can swap scripts with strangers, which I'm a big fan of because it's free and in Goodwill, you're reading other people's scripts. And you really want to look and see if there's reoccurring problems coming up with these readers. My rule of thumb is like if somebody brings it up once, opinion, twice, you might have a problem, and third, you're on fire. Whatever it is, you probably need to address it immediately. So I think this is a really great time for revision mode. I also think this is a really great time for you to sit down with your script and look at the narrative writing and really ask yourself, what do you need and not need? Spend some time with that. Because when we're sometimes writing a first draft, we're not really worried about something being poetic or beautiful to read. And this is a great time for you to look at your lines and say, okay, can I say this shorter, or can I say this in a more interesting way? I actually found myself reading a bunch of books on poetry about flight for a script once I did, because I wanted to use some of that more colorful language. There's this great line, for example, in one poem that's the bluebird carries the sky on its back. And so I was like, oh my gosh, my character's got to carry the sky on his back at one point when he's flying. So things like that, I think it's great to really kind of play with your language and show your reader that you want each part of this to sparkle. And then I think the hardest thing you probably need to do is like a full, what I'd say is like character pass for each of your lead characters, and make sure that they're being, their wants and needs are consistent. I'll just pick like one character out of a script and say, for this day, I'm only looking at this character and looking at all their scenes and making sure they're consistent in their wants and needs, seeing if they need anything else, seeing if they're kind of one note or I need to give them more dimension. And if you do that with each one, you're going to find that you're going to get a multi-layered process. And I think that's really helpful in kind of giving that depth and complexity to your draft.
What should people expect to get out of submitting to a screenwriting contest? The one you mentioned earlier sounded great because there was like a development component of it where they took promising ideas, promising 15 pages, and then turned them into things that maybe had a greater chance of being purchased and like networked around, right? But like something like Austin or the other ones you've read for, what should people expect?
Well, I think a lot of people like to enter contests just to see, how am I doing, right? Is my script that I'm really in love with, is it succeeding in certain ways? Am I meeting kind of my expectations? Do other people like it as much as I like it? So a lot of people use it kind of just like as a gauge of like how well received is this. That being said, it's a contest. Everything is subjective. I've submitted to contests before where I'm like, this script is banger. Like everyone should love it. And I'm out the first round. And then later that script does really well in another contest. So it's not a consistent thing, but I think a lot of people want to see it to measure their progress and see if other people see what they like about the script. A lot of other people use it as like a goal, a deadline. I've got till this amount of time to finish the story because then somebody needs to read it. So that's very helpful as well. And I think the other thing that's great about Austin is you do get notes and feedback on it. The notes are, I think it's under like 500 words. So it's not going to be a giant essay, I think, unless you purchase their notes. But it does cover some of the major topics of like, how's the plot going? How's the story development? Is there anything that's considered a little too familiar and overdone? And so I think it's great for you to kind of sit there going, well, how do I compare against somebody who maybe worked at a production company and it came across their desk, which I used to work at a production company and it came, so oftentimes I'll pretend like, oh, I'm at my old job. I'm considering this, at my production company. What does it look like?
What other ecosystems, other than Austin, because you work with them,
Yeah.
you've placed in the Nichols, which I want to ask a couple questions about.
Sure.
What other ecosystems do you, as a writer and a creative, like and suggest people look into?
Well, I think it's really hard because there's a million screenplay contests out there, and each one is kind of promising something different. Or you have stuff like Coverfly and Blacklist, which are kind of like aggregators, where you want to kind of like the more you play, the better you can build up your score and things like that. But it also means you're spending money, time, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think Nickel is always a gold standard for features. They only do features, but I like them quite a bit. I did well in Script Pipeline TV. I did grand prize for their 2016 category. And that's great for TV. They've placed a lot of people. I think one of the scripts they got the prize for in 2022 ended up being like #1 on the blacklist, the annual blacklist. So they're pretty good about when people place or make it pretty far in the contest, moving them along and getting them reps and stuff. If they can. Obviously, not everything is a perfect fit every time. But I do know those people there, and I know that they take it pretty seriously. Those are probably the ones I think of the most. I think what's seasoned and been around a lot is like Page Awards. I've seen a lot, Final Draft, Big Break, and obviously Austin is well regarded. I know people who get read request just by getting into the second round of Austin. They'll say, "Hey, I just got into second round," and people will say, "Okay, pass it over," because they already know like you're in the top 20%. And so that means that like, oh, this script is probably pretty much on its way. Blacklist and Coverfly do something like this as well. Like I said, they're aggregators. So like Blacklist, you pay for a read, and then it adds a score to your Blacklist score, and it could be anywhere from like 0 to 10. But if you get over an 8, they start kind of recommending it and saying you're a recommended script. So a lot of people are aiming for that. I think that because they create their own data and they have their own readers, there are probably certain projects that do well amongst their readers that may not be their genre, or maybe not be like, oh, this is what's selling right now. Where Coverfly aggregates contest wins, not just individual scores. So like you could say like, oh, I won the family, the Screencraft family writing contest, which is, maybe very specific and niche, but you get points towards that. So I think sometimes Coverfly gives you a stronger sense of like how you do amongst all the genres and all the contests and all the types of readers out there. So they're helpful, but my rule of thumb always is, entering every contest can be really expensive. So I would consolidate it to the ones where you really really want what they're offering. Austin, if you make it to the second round, there's a bunch of, when you go to Austin, there's some second round panels and meet and greets and things that are specific to them. So if you're going to Austin, I would throw your hat in the ring, to see if you can be a second rounder as well. If you are a feature screenwriter and you want to really see how you compare just against every feature screenwriter that year, the nickel is kind of a good pool to jump in just to see how you're doing. And they actually do notes now too. So you can get a little feedback at the end I think you opt in for them. So I think these are good things just to see like their gauges. My rule of thumb though for contests is they're really only there to help you in your career. You don't want to be like, oh, I want to be a contest winner. You're really doing it so people notice your screenplays. So I wouldn't go chasing too many contests.
Are you still doing contests as a writer? Will you enter?
I have entered a few, but I am pretty retired at this point. And like I got told by Script Pipeline that they love me, but I can't win again. So actually I write articles for their website. But they like you can't, because then other people need to be noticed as well. So like, and then I actually know, because of my job at the writer's store, people at Final Draft. So it would be inappropriate for me to enter into some of these contests where like they were my peers. So I don't really go there. Not because they aren't good contests, but I was just like, oh no, you guys know me.
Master the game, girl. You
Yeah.
mastered the game.
Yeah, exactly. So it needs to be for other people. But there are some like smaller contests or things like Seed and Spark, the crowdfunding one. They do something called Hometown Heroes, where if you raise money during the month of the Hometown Heroes contest, that's how we got connected with the Duplass brothers. They you can become EP, your project can become EP'd or selected. So like I do enter other things, more like filmmaking and film festival stuff now. So I guess if it makes you guys all feel better, you're not necessarily competing against me, because I'm a pretty good writer. So there's more space for everybody.
So I want to transition into, we're talking about screenwriting and winning contests, but the point of that is to get recognized as a screenwriter, or the big hope is to have that thing be made. And you're a writer, you're a director, you've done the film festival circuit for the indie world. And something that I found so very fascinating and so very avant-garde of you to do is your Postmates thing. I heard on a different podcast you talking about this. Do you want to clue the audience into what I'm talking about?
I think it's called Delivery. It's a script about a Postmates driver. No.
Well, I thought you went to different film festivals and you're a Postmates driver order to.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, that's a very specific podcast you were writing that you read. Yes. So I'm not a rich woman, and I think it's important you know that because sometimes people seem like they have endless funds to make their films and write their screenplays. And the truth is, the middle class screenwriter is still here, kicking and strong. And if you're one of them, that's perfectly okay, and your voice is very much needed. So the film festival circuit is got his own issues that's different than the contest circuit. And one of the biggest things is it's a very director-led circuit where oftentimes if a project gets in, the director is often invited to the festival, maybe comped, things like that. But it's kind of sometimes a Wild West, even with the bigger festivals, to get the rest of the team there. And I was the writer on Miseducation of Bindu. And ironically, I also did wardrobe, but that's like a different story altogether. Because in film school, I wanted to be on set more. And so I picked up a on-set skill. And so there wasn't a lot of budget to bring the writer and a couple of other teammates along. So I ended up like funding a lot of my trip by I'd rent a car in the city and I would Postmates for like basically my room and board as I went around city to city. And so I've Postmated across country going to different film festivals, which is actually really a great way to see a city because number one, you learn where all the locals eat. That's good info. And you do a lot of driving around and you get to see the city and not just like be stuck in a hotel room and stuff like that. But yes, that is the Postmates story. I'm glad you heard it.
I did. So awesome.
Yeah. I did turn it into a story about a delivery driver later. So that's why I was like, I don't know which one it was. Yeah.
Well, pitch us. That's the podcast.
Oh, okay. So this one is a feature film. It's called Delivery, and it is about a queer homeless delivery driver who is trying to save up enough money that weekend to buy a camper van to rescue her younger sister from an abusive home. And so it really just follows 72 hours of them trying to meet their, it's not Postmates because nobody wants to get sued. It's a fictional company called Deliver Yum. And they're trying to complete this weekend bonus where they get, I think it's like 10 5-star ratings. And that will give them like an extra like $500. So they're trying to get that to get the money. And it's all the people they meet along the way. And then them living and dying by this app that basically decides whether they're going to be successful or not. So it's a little darkly cynical and also lovely.
What a great quick pitch. And we've been doing this podcast for a year now, and I just learned something. You started with your character, which is nothing new, right? Start with the description of your character, and then you quite effortlessly said, this is what their goal is.
Yes.
And then you said, this is why they have this goal, all in the first 20 seconds of your pitch, basically. And that's such a helpful thing because now you know what the stakes are and you know if it's achievable or not, right? Right off the bat. We know who they are. We know what they're after. We know why they're doing it. What a great frame up. Thank you for sharing that.
I'm so happy. I can do that for you. I think the nice thing about pitching is once you get used to telling the pitch a lot, I've said that one many times, is you start to get used to how like you'd pitch it quickly at a party. Like this is probably the pitch I'm going to give everyone I meet at a holiday party this entire month. They're going to be like, what's it about? And I'm like, oh, I've got 30 seconds. Okay. And let's do it really quick because I don't want to watch them get a little bored or notice like a fancy snack behind me because that's the most amount of time I have.
Yeah. And that's the biggest danger when pitching is people disengage.
Yes.
Or hungry people.
Hungry is a type of disengagement. I cannot compete with like a delicious cookie, and I wouldn't pretend to.
No one can. No one can. So that's one project that you've already written. What are some projects that you're passionate about right now?
So I have another project. So my goal right now, because I love filmmaking as much as I love writing, is I want to make another feature. And because films are really expensive, one of the things I'm working on myself as a writer is writing stuff for a very low budget. So like I'm aiming for stuff for under 500K. So delivery is under 500K. It's probably about 300. But I was like, can I go lower? And so I decided to write a piece that I think is going to run about 30K, based on some resources I have. So basically, I had a friend who said, we can use my mom's house on the East Coast by the Chesapeake Bay. It's very pretty. And I'm like, great. That's it. That's our location. So I sat there during the writer's strike and I said, okay, what can I do in a house besides just have a killer show up, or a bunch of people in a cab? It's not a cabin either. So I was like, it's not, and I don't want to do that. But I thought horror is good. I don't write a lot of horror, but I think it's time. And so I said, what if a house sitter is stuck taking care of her parents' friend's home that they're in Europe, and she's house sitting at this house, and things start to get weird because they have a skittish cat she never sees. She just leaves food out, and it disappears, and she ends up befriending this cat that turns out to not really be a cat, but a demon that's been eating like her Tinder dates and Postmate drivers and things like that, and getting more powerful.
That's awesome.
Yeah, until like at the midpoint, she finds out that, gets a call from her mom and says, oh, they boarded their cat. There's no cat there. You probably noticed by now. And she's like, something's been eating this. So we decided to do something like that, because it's very small. And also, I think what's great is it's basically like a low-key demonic possession story, because as this cat gets fed and is bigger, this person with more self-esteem is feeling better about themselves because they're linked. The person who fed it is linked to it. And so it's about gaining confidence, but then maybe going too far. So it's fun because you get to watch this person and you're like, the first half, you're like, you go girl. And then you're like, you stop girl, stop it. And so it's nice to kind of have that horror ending as well. And that one's called Feed Fifi. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say an alternate title should be Stop Girl.
Stop girl, stop. Yeah. Fifi is I adopted so there was real inspiration for this. I adopted a small shy cat last year, and she hid under my bed for obviously a good month because she's like, who are you people? And then at night she'd go and just run around my whole house, and it sounded like a demon was out there, a ghost. And I realized, like, if anyone has a cat and their house is haunted, they'll never know, because you just go cat and you roll over and go to sleep. So that was my inspiration. I was like, I would not know if I was getting possessed.
That's great. Well, this has been lovely. I only have one more question, which
Absolutely.
is, what is something you wish someone would ask you but hasn't ever asked you?
Right. You warned me ahead of time that this might be a question coming up, and I just was like, nah, I'll think about it later. I think one of the big ones is it worth it? A lot of times people, they get wrapped up in the process, and they get wrapped up in these contests, and I got one win and one win and one win. And I think at the end of the day, the happiest screenwriters I've met are the people who just love doing it. And, at the end of the day, it's really great when you can get recognition and you can get your stuff made. But I can think of no better thing myself as a writer than finishing a script and being so full of energy and joy and delight at finally getting my characters where they need to go. And I think if that's worth it for you, it's a big sign you should keep going.
Well said.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
great.
thank you so much, Kay. I'm
You're
so
very
happy
welcome.
we randomly met because I had cake and you had a drink.
Yes,
It's
I am too. I am too. Thank you.
we should be walking advertisements for why you should go to the Austin Film Festival in person.
We will, we'll shout out Austin, be like, by the way, free tickets next year. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
This has been lovely. I learned a lot. I can't wait to see your projects and what else you're going to do next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will let you know. We should
Yes.
be hopefully filming Fifi in the spring if all goes well. So
Great.
We'll need everybody to be like, Kay's okay, and pass around the good word.
Fingers crossed. We'll say all the good things and
Thank you.
all the
Thank
things
you.
for that and all the next projects you have in the pipeline after that.
Same to both of you, and
Thank you.
thank you for letting me be here today.
Yeah,
Of course.
our pleasure.
Okay.
All right.
All
Well, from Hollywood, cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I'm an OC right now. Cheers. Yes. Yeah.
Cheers from Hollywood.
All right.
If you're on the fence about subscribing, know that a portion of all subscription fees go toward the nonprofit Young Storytellers, raising voices one story at a time.